by contributing to the John Lothian News GoFundMe campaign to support the Markets Wiki education history-focused video series and more.
I'm from 5 kids, 4 boys and a girl. My sister was the baby. They just wanted her to be a school teacher, which she always resented. 2 of my older brothers were doctors. One was a comedian. My mother was pushing for me to be a doctor. And I said, no. I watched their lifestyle. I was having too much fun, rock and roll, women, and playing sports. I said, no, I'm not going that way. I said, I'll find my own way. So I didn't know really what I wanted to be. If you would ask me, I would have loved to have been a professional baseball player, but didn't have the talent. I had the desire, not enough talent. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then I thought I'd want to be a college professor. So I went to undergraduate school in Illinois, and then I went to graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin, in political science with a large emphasis on economics. And I thought that's what I wanted to do for my life. I got my master's, stayed a little bit longer. Nobody was getting jobs. You know, it was post-Vietnam. It was 76, 77. I said, I'm out of here. What am I going to waste my time for? I'm not going to teach in Montana or somewhere else. I had greater expectations. So then I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I had a whole lot of knowledge. And I said, let me find a way. My father was one of these serial entrepreneurs, and he was between jobs. He had sold cars after the war, and then he did a lot of other things. And then a friend of his was down at the exchange, and he said, hey, for $10,000, you can buy an IMM seat. My father said, what's that? So he went, and my dad never went to college, but he was really bright, especially in math, and went and did some homework. So bought a seat for $10,000, went down there and tried it. So one summer I worked down there. He said, come on down, take a look at it. And here I was, believe me, on an academic path, reading Marxist economics. It was not the place that I definitely wanted to work. Him and his partner gave me free range. And I was bored to death down there, by the way. It was 1973, and I'd stand by the currency pits all day. And they would say, well, call the bank and see how they make the mark. And the bank guys used to yell at me, at American National, why are you bothering us? There's nothing going on. But I got to see it, and I said, this isn't for me. I know that. Then I was in graduate school, and my dad's friend, who was his partner, Lenny Feldman, one of the great characters down at the exchange, calls me up in graduate school. He says, hey, your dad tells me you know a lot about currencies. I was doing a lot of research on multinational corporations and foreign currencies and the way they move money and how they invest. Write me a little paper. So I write him a 3-page paper. He says, he put a little predictive in there about the elections, how they made, and it was actually pretty predictive. So he calls me and he made a play. He says, hey, you're pretty good at this. Why don't you come down? And he says, I'm going to do this currency arbitrage business. He says, I said, I'm not coming down there. I said, I'm going to Washington, which I had planned to go to work for the Frank Church's subcommittee on multinationals. That was the basis of my master's thesis. So I said no. And then so I came home to Chicago. My parents said, well, we're sending you $250. Go buy a suit because you're going to get a job. I said, really? And they said, you're going to shave and get a haircut. And it's, life is making a change for you. I said, okay. So I buy a brown suit, go to interviews I got some interviews at Continental, American National, First Chicago. And they said, well, why should we hire you? You have no MBA. I said, yeah, but I have pretty deep knowledge about the third world loans that you're doing that are all going to fall apart. And they laughed at me. Couldn't wait to get me out of there. So that didn't work out. So I was actually reffing high school basketball in the city and working with emotionally disturbed kids in the afternoon through one of the children's agencies and doing all the reading, novels and stuff I wanted to read. And he kept saying, come on down. You're really good at this. So he asked me a third time. He said, hey, I'm not asking you again. The church committee had been disbanded on multinationals. So he said, you're not going anywhere anyway. So I said, okay. So it was May of 1977. I got approved and I came down and he started this currency arbitrage, which he said, here, run it. I go, huh? So I learned as I went, but it was really a fortuitous time. And that's how I got down there. So my dad said to me, he says, okay, you're going to go to work. I was staying ungodly hours and, doing the forward allocations and formulas. And my dad said, okay, because then after he bought an IMM seat, but he really didn't like what was going on there, the options. So then when the option seats came for $10,000, he bought a CBOE seat. So he went over to the CBOE, he says, here, I'm going to give you the seat and you're not going to pay rent and we're partners. So I probably have the most expensive seat ever bought at the exchange. I used to tease my dad about that all the time. And then after a while, he said, okay, he said, you paid me enough. We were partners. And I'm glad it's worked out for you. So that's how I got to, because Lenny said I could buy you a seat, which was a mistake because we should have bought another seat or two. He says, but as long as your dad's willing to do that and that's your deal, that's fine. So that's how I came to the seat. I had a roommate who was a lawyer, went to law school, and then he came down for a number of years. He's back practicing law, Rick Riedman, but he does securities and commodities law. But he was down there for 9 or 10 years. A friend of mine from graduate school, Kevin McCarthy, who's really bright. Kevin and I still talk. He came down there, went to work for Madoff doing currency arbitrage because we were kind of following the same path in graduate school. And he was from Westchester, New York. And then he wound up at Goldman. Many people, Sam Richter, a lot of people. I brought down, a lot of people followed me down there. It was a beating. I mean, I stood next to Andy Brinkman in the Swiss franc pit for years. And Andy was about 6'6", 230, carved out of stone. And his arms would go flailing and but it did, of course, any audiologist will tell you my hearing and every trade, they call it trader's ear because the range of the decibels that you hear because from being on the floor, you can't hear. And, there were a lot of guys who wound up with polyps under larynx. I never got that. It was actually pretty good because it kept me, as you see, I'm coming from working out right now. I'm almost 68 years old. I still run 7-minute miles. I lift weights, and being down there, you had to be in shape because it was grueling. And I like being busy all day. So when guys wanted to go play golf a lot of days, I said, give me your deck. Because the way I was trading already was as a position trader. And I could fill orders because I never scalped where I filled. Never. I learned that from Vince Schreiber. You don't scalp where you fill. It's just too much of a conflict of interest. So, and a lot of guys who, they knew I wasn't there to steal their business. I didn't care. But if they wanted to go, I had enough expertise and they'd say, go. I said, go out here. I'll watch the business for the day. And it was a good way to stay busy. It was actually a good thing because I'd go to work at 5 a.m. I would take the dogs out. The kids really weren't up, except when they were little. But then I would, help get them sorted out. And then I'd be home at 3 p.m. So when they were in school, I'd be there to get them off the bus. I could drive carpool. I could be there to play with, it was actually a really good thing. I used it and I had promised my wife that I would never run for the board until the last one was really far enough in school that, and I stayed true to that because the guys would say, run for the board. I was on so many committees. I was really lucky. I had a very good floor reputation, was really respected. But I told my wife, so in 1997, when the baby was 10 and in 5th grade, she ran for the school board, or she went for the school board 2 years earlier. And then I said, okay, I'll run for the CME board. And that's, but it was actually a really good, and my kids were kind of funny because, this was the talk and the phone would ring at night. We'd be at the dinner table and I was rolling positions to Hong Kong. So I'd be getting calls and I would close this out there at 3 a.m. My wife used to hate it because they would call from Hong Kong because I had to roll, especially cash currency positions. But my kids really, because they would answer the phone and they would take executions, and there were guys who, futures execution. So they're pretty astute at it. In fact, a funny story is my daughter, I don't know, she's the lead journalist for Bloomberg on the bond and Fed. She's covering all the short-term stuff. So about 5 or 6 years ago, when they were already talking about the end of LIBOR, she's doing an interview with Rich Sandor. and Rich says, he says, I've been interviewed by a lot of people. This is the best interview I've ever. He said, how do you know all these things? She said, well, at my dinner table. He said, what do you mean at your dinner table? She said, well, my father. She says, who's your father? She says, Larry Harris. And I know Rich pretty well. And he goes, oh my God, I had no idea. So he calls me right away. He goes, you can't believe I sat with this interview. So it was really good. My kids, none of them came into the business. My daughter wound up there by pure accident, but I have 3 girls and a boy. None of them wound up, but they all understand the business because we would talk about it, about what goes on in the world. I had been offered a lot of jobs because of my in-depth knowledge in the currency markets in New York. And I probably, and I used to love the fact of the freedom that we had on the floor. I didn't have 10 bosses telling me this and that because I did a lot of business in New York and I would go visit. But I would probably go at some point that route because there's more stability to it. As much as the freedom was great, the stability and the payout at the end was pretty nice. I have managed or worked at 3 different owned 3 different hedge funds. I made the gigantic mistake in 86, 87. I was partners, my partner and I, we raised, he was good at money raising. We raised $7 million, which in 86, 87 was pretty good. And $1 million of it was Paul Tudor Jones. It was own funds. And he wanted to, and we were doing really well. We were up about 38 or 39%. And Paul was doing that Tudor Prime deal with Merrill Lynch. And he said, here, I'm going to give you another 10 million. I go, we can't take another 10. How am I going to trade that much money? And he's laughing, going, and so by the end, I said, if we're going to get this big, I don't think we can do it. So we closed the fund. It was the gigantic mistake number 1. I went back and did it with somebody else in 92, 93. And then I had a lot of money from Commodity Corp. And we were doing pretty well too. And I said, no, we'll never get in the regs. I said, let's close this. 2 gigantic mistakes, especially because I liked Paul Tudor Jones. And I thought Paul Tudor Jones had phenomenal amount of integrity. And I liked it. And that would have been a great path to take. Do the Globex screen design with Bill Shepard, Scott Gordon, Barry Lynn. Because Leo said, you can't have tech people design this because if you give it to tech people, it'll be like a Christmas tree with so many things, you'll scare the traders. So what is it that traders will want? How do we simplify this so we don't scare everybody and make it, as we would say, user-friendly? So I was aware of what was coming and I was for it because I'd go to New York and I'd see all the traders already gravitating to either Reuters or EBS. And so much spot currency business was taking place on the screen, even though I saw some of the loopholes in it. So that was kind of interesting. But my trading, because of the way that I trade, I have a screen up in front of me right now, John, with 164 variables. It's a CQG screen. I've used the same. I could do it for cheaper, but my eyes are just so accustomed to looking at it. And I trade foreign bonds, metals. I trade everything around the globe. So I had already started to move away. And even when I was still doing currency arbitrage, I would have 2 clerks on my back because if I wanted to do some bonds against some currencies so I was always trading that way anyway. So it would just be meeting off the floor, especially when I was managing a fund, became mandatory. It was just too hard to do it from the floor. Although the greatest thing about the floor was the energy. You can go down to the floor and get a phenomenal amount of energy, just phenomenal. One time I was buying Soviet art when it was starting to open up. And one of the artists from the Soviet Union came down as a guest of the person who owned the gallery, Bill Struve. And he says he wants to see the floor. I couldn't get him off the floor. He was there for 6 hours in my pocket, basically watching, and he was mesmerized. He says, you don't feel the energy? Well, I'm down there every day. I know what it's talking about, but it was a regular day. And he was mesmerized by the power of it, so that I miss. So that's why I like to go fill orders at times because I like to get energized like that. But I could think better and put together what I called my matrix off the floor. And then when it became all electronic, I'm sitting here in Scottsdale right now, and there's nothing that I can't do that I used to do. The only thing is, when you're on the floor, you do get an edge. When numbers come out, you have no edge. The only edge I have is being patient and waiting for the algorithms to drive the market one way or another, and hopefully I can find a level where there's something that I want to do and wait for. Like today is a perfect day. But you've had to learn that. You can't. I knew I could never outspeed these, because I was never going to spend that kind of money. There were people I talked to who wanted to build neural networks of my matrix. Well, when, back in the 90s, they were throwing around numbers, 500,000, 600,000, and it would be obsolete. I said, I'm not doing that. I basically can build my own human algorithm. And that's what I think of myself, because my eyes are focused on so many different things. I've traded through a lot, even from the board of trade. And, when you'd get the calls, because I did a lot of order filling as a favor. It was not the way I want to make money. Jim Sinclair, who was one of the top golden currency traders, Jim and I became very good friends. In fact, his nephew, John Crowley, who I believe is still the best gold stock analyst I know. John lives in Woodstock, New York. We've been on the internet all day going back. I still talk to John. Jim, I talk to on occasion. I write a blog, so his readers have picked up my blog for years. And Jim and I always had a good relationship. And I would fill gold orders for him, only for him, because he'd call me and he'd say, I want to do this and do that, or currencies. And we had a phenomenal relationship. Built on a phenomenal amount of trust. But when you get a call, it's 1:10 at the Board of Trade, and CC Odom just got off the elevator and he's going to the silver pit. So, I remember those with the whole Hunt debacle. So we went through that. Mexican crises, the day Sadat was shot. Of course, the week of the stock market crash in 87, we went into the crash short S&Ps based on some technical levels that the technician that we used had. And I made a lot more money trading euro dollars, thinking, well, the Fed's going to have to cut rates and, certain movements in the currency markets. But so I remember those times, of course, the Russian situation in 98. Wow, there's just so many. Now, when 9/11 happened, I was at home and I didn't even know that it had happened. I was just getting ready to leave to go downtown because I had to be home early. For my kids, my youngest one was doing something, and I didn't know. And they called me from the floor, the guys who did all my orders. Frank Goldak, he said, "Turn on the TV." I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Just turn on the TV." And I already had a Globex machine at home, so I saw the prices moving, but I had no idea what was going on. And I saw the first tower was on fire, and then I saw the next plane hit. So I wasn't on the floor, and I couldn't go down there anyway. I closed out all my positions. 2 days later, I bought some Swiss francs because I said, well, the world is so crazy that I think that's, and that was, but I really didn't trade. I had no stomach for it. The crash didn't do that to me. But that left me numb. So many, I can't begin to. It used to be great during Fed time. Remember 10:30 to 10:45 Fed time. In the markets, we used to pull up the sign like Miller time. Let's see what's going to happen. Are they going to do repos? Are they going to do systems? Are they going to do match? And it would move the markets.
John Lothian News would like to thank those individuals who have contributed to our Markets Wiki Education GoFundMe campaign. Their financial assistance allows us to produce and distribute videos like this for our Open Outcry Traders History Project or the Path to Electronic Trading video series. Join them in supporting John Lothian News, capturing the history of our industry.